Hello, and welcome to the webinar on Coaching the Missing Link with Gale Mote. My name is Chelsea Hillman, and I'm the Professional MBA Site Director in the Quad Cities and will be your moderator for today. This is our fifth in a series of webinars offered through our Professional MBA Speaker Series, co-sponsored by the University of Iowa Community Credit Union. Now for some housekeeping items. Before we get started, please download the slides for today from the handout section of your control panel. Your control panel should be visible on your screen. It is the small vertical dock on the right side of your screen. The top button is an orange arrow. The orange arrow will expand the control panel. If you would like to participate during the webinar, you may submit questions to us at any time. To submit a question, click in the questions box in the control panel, type in your question, and click send. About halfway through the presentation, we will stop to see if there are any relevant questions to the material that has already been covered. After a few minutes of answering questions, Gale will continue with her presentation. We will leave additional time at the end of today's session for any new questions. We will try to answer your questions either during or at the end of the presentation, but we may not get to them all. Today's registrants will receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of this webinar. Feel free to forward it to others who may be interested in this topic. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to share some exciting news with you. Last week, we announced that we are launching the Iowa Online MBA in August 2019. This fully online MBA is an extension of our professional MBA program, which is ranked number 22 in the country by US News and World Report. Online education isn't new to us. We've been delivering online courses for working professionals since 2003. However, this fully online option will make the Iowa MBA accessible to students regardless of their location with the same curriculum, tuition, and world-class faculty you have come to expect from the Iowa MBA program. In addition, if you are one of our many alumni participating today, you may also be interested to know that all Iowa MBA alumni can enroll in selective in-person MBA electives at a 50% discount on tuition. More details on both of these programs may be found at our website at tippie.uiowa.edu. Before we get started, we'd like to ask you all a question. How many people are watching with you today? Please select an answer and we'll close the poll in just a few moments. Okay, so as you can see here, we have a lot of people who are just watching the webinar with over 200 attendees that we can see, and a few people joining you in the room as well. So thank you very much for answering our poll. And now on to our speaker. It is always a pleasure when we can showcase our best and brightest faculty to the business and Iowa alumni communities around the world. Our speaker, Gale Mote, earned her MBA from the University of Iowa and is currently an adjunct professor in the professional MBA program. She teaches one of our most popular electives, Maximizing Team Performance. Gale is also the recipient of one of 4 President and Provost Awards for teaching excellence from the University of Iowa presented in 2014. When people come to Gale's presentations and workshops, they usually leave with one key question: where does she get the energy? For over 28 years, she has been designing and delivering motivational workshops and training classes for all types of industries and organizations. Her firm, Gale Mote Associates, specializes in high-performance work cultures, team development, emotional intelligence, frontline manager training, and organizational development consulting. Her sessions are creative, energizing, participant-centered, and get results. As you can see, Gale is an extremely accomplished individual, and we could take most of our hours sharing these accomplishments with you. Rather than do that, I suggest you go to the Tippie's website to see all the very interesting things she has done, so we can get right into her presentation. Please help me in welcoming Gale Mote.
Great. Thank you. Privileged to be here today. Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, the Tippie School of Management, for this privilege to talk with you today about a gap that's in a lot of organizations that's impacting engagement and overall performance and business results. And hopefully you'll leave with some really good tips and techniques on how you can close that gap in your own organization. So let's go ahead and get started. What I'd first like you to do is take a moment and reflect on this quote from Jim Clifton, President and CEO of the Gallup Corporation. Last year, in the State of the American Workplace address, he made this plea, he made this encouraging remarks to all of us basically saying that we really need to move from a position of performance management to performance development, and that we really need to be focusing more on purpose and helping people to make those transitions. And I think that's where coaching really does come into play, is because we're much more in a performance development mode. This also reminds me of some of the work that Daniel Pink did, especially when we were talking about what really drives folks' internal motivation, whether you're millennials or veterans or where you fall on the continuum, but certainly mastery. Being really great at what you do, being able to play to your best every day, autonomy, having the freedom to be able to do what it is that you do without a lot of micromanagement, and then certainly this purpose, understanding the why. So coaching falls into this by helping us move in this direction of this performance development. So we have a polling question for you right now, and I want you to just take a look at it and let's see what the responses are. Ah, very good. Am I back on? So this is the infamous Gale Mote sitting, standing ovation. Yes, the answer is 67%. And if you want the details, 51% disengaged and 16% actually are actively disengaged. I'm going to tell you what I find incredibly disappointing and depressing about this statistic. Gallup has been asking this question ever since the book First Break All the Rules came out in 1999, so pretty much in the early 2000s. That number has not changed much. It's hovering around that 70% mark. And I asked myself, how come after 18 years we're not making more progress on this? And I think part of it is managers are not managing. Right? We're not putting our people first. We're not taking the effort of working with our team members, with our people, as a priority. We're working managers, we're working on projects, we're working on other things. We're not actually taking the time to do that. You all know that people don't quit their companies, they quit their managers. And so this is where this comes into play, and taking a look at coaching. Here's some more interesting Gallup statistics. I think the slide's advancing. There we go. Let's take a look at a few more Gallup statistics. This came out of the State of the American Workplace. Again, 21% of the folks were saying that their performance was not managed in a way that motivates them to do outstanding work. 13% said their leaders communicated effectively. So what we're basically saying here is that there's a tremendous room for opportunity, for improvement, right? And I think one of the things that we're finding is that our employees are not getting the guidance and the direction that they need, plus the feedback that they need to know in a timely manner that what they're doing matters and that they're moving in a direction that's positive for themselves and as well for the organization. So an interesting trend that's happening, and maybe this is happening in your organizations right now too, is that we're getting rid of the old, quote, performance management structures. There was an interesting Harvard article in 2015 with Marcus Buckingham and some folks from Deloitte, basically talking about how they were revamping their whole performance management process, getting rid of the annual review and focusing more on just weekly conversations, weekly coaching conversations with their employees, which is a real stretch for the managers because that means that has to become a priority. That has to become the most important thing on your to-do list in a week rather than just waiting every 6 months or a year to have a conversation with your employees. So interesting when we look at some of these statistics. Again, only 20% of employees said they'd actually had a conversation with their managers in the last 6 months, or that the feedback was done in a way that was helpful to them. So I'd like you to just reflect, is that true for you? Is that true for some of the folks that you work with in your organization, to say, yeah, we're really in that lower quartile when it comes to doing the things that matter most. So we're going to talk about coaching and how this gets us into this mode of performance development, having weekly conversations, really being there for our employees, putting their needs first, and making sure that we're on top of fueling that performance. So the research I'm going to be sharing with you and the model I'm going to share with you is based on this book by John Sanger and Kathleen Stennett. And one of the reasons I love John Sanger's work is it's very research-based. So he goes out and he studies a lot of different leaders and finds out what some of the correlations are in terms of making that happen. So here's one of the things they found out. When they measured leaders who were really, really good at coaching, really good at listening to their employees, guiding their performance, fueling their performance, these were some of the outcomes. They felt like they were in more meaningful work, the engagement went up, productivity went up, there were better relationships, there was a drop in turnover, there was more innovation, risk-taking taking on, and obviously more resilience with the stressful lives we lead every day. My challenge to you is this particular slide, if you laid it down in front of some of your senior leadership, would they say, yeah, I'm interested in that? I think that would be great if we could get those kinds of business outcomes coming from what we do every day as managers. Well, the answer is you can. You can, and part of it is just by starting with this coaching. So let's start by defining coaching, and the definition that you see here comes from John Sanger and Kathleen Stennett. Interactions that help the individual being coached to expand awareness, discover superior solutions, and make and implement better decisions. This is about the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. This is about helping people come up with their own solutions, guiding them through that. In coaching, the coach owns the process, but not the content, which means this is not mentoring. And I think this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that managers make. They think they're coaching and they're not. What they're doing is they're mentoring. I'm giving advice, I'm sharing my experience, I'm sharing best practices with you. And don't get me wrong, there's absolutely a time and a place for that, but not when you're in, quote, coaching mode. I think maybe we think back to those of us who are on athletic teams and we think about, our athletic coaches and, the kind of feedback that they were always giving us. There's a time and a place for feedback. There's a time and a place for advice in the coaching model, but we'll talk about when that is and how we make that happen. So again, coaching is the art of the question. It's really about developing your questions and your ability to ask those questions and listen to the responses so that you can guide people to kind of come up with their own answers. Now, what gets in the way of that? What prevents managers and leaders from really being good, quote, coaches? So another polling question going to be coming up for you here. What gets in the way of that? Let's hear what some of your responses are, please. Thanks. Okay, so I'm looking at this, and the majority of you are saying time. How interesting. If I had to challenge you with that and say, okay, so there's never enough time for coaching, there's not enough time to delegate, it's faster for me to do it myself. The problem with that is that you get in a state of status quo. More of the same gets you more of the same, and you're never going to move forward with that. So again, it's making it a priority. And Doug Conan, who is the CEO of Campbell, I think he put this beautifully in his book Touch Points, because what he was saying is every interaction you have with one of your employees, whether it's a 5-minute conversation in a hallway or a quick 15-minute meeting after you've had a formal staff meeting, is an opportunity to coach. It's an opportunity to coach. So here's what I believe. Once you develop the habits, once you get this framework really solid in who you are, then that will just kick in. When you have those opportunities with your employees, you'll see those come into play. So the time thing, I think, is one. I lost the poll results, but I'm thinking, some of the other ones I'll just speak to here. What is it? My boss doesn't coach me. Well, that's kind of like saying I don't give recognition because my recognition doesn't, my boss never recognizes me. Well, gosh, be better than that. Be the role model. Do a better job. The one that says, let me see, avoiding uncomfortable discussions. It doesn't have to be uncomfortable. I think we all know that feedback and coaching conversations can be done in a very positive, principled way. Sometimes when you're giving what I would call very specific feedback about performance where an employee's struggling or they're not meeting expectations, it starts off as feedback, but then it turns into a coaching moment. I've always said when you're giving feedback, the employee, the person who you're giving that feedback to, they need to come up with a solution, not you. Because now they own it, and it's got a much better chance of really happening. So I think those are good ones. The other one I'm going to just speak to briefly on this polling question is misunderstanding the nature of coaching. Again, what I said earlier, I think a lot of people think advice giving, mentoring, sharing best practices is coaching. In reality, it's really not. So think about what gets in the way and then say, okay, I'm not going to go down that path. I'm going to look at it differently. I'm going to see it differently. So another thing that we have to get ourselves out of is this, what we call systems of relationships. And you've all probably heard the cliche, give a man a fish and he eats for a day. If you teach a man how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And every relationship kind of forms into this system that you're seeing here. So there's the employee, the manager, and the manager comes back to the employee. And so let me just kind of give you a situation. So an employee comes into you and they're complaining about a coworker who's not giving them the information that they need on a timely basis, and it's really impacting their ability to do their job. And they're asking you, what do I do about this? So your response is, well, I think you should go do this and go do this and go do this. So the employee leaves your office and they go off and they try to do those things. So the next time they have a challenge with another coworker or different situations, their model, their habit is to come back to you and say, hey, I'm having this situation. What do you think I should do? And then you give them the advice and then off they go and they try to implement it. So it's kind of like I do, or I order, you do. I tell you what to do, you go and implement it. And that cycle just keeps happening because of our behavior as managers. So what we want to do is we want to try to break that cycle. If you really want your employees to take more ownership, to take more initiative, to be more forthcoming in terms of managing some of those situations, you have to be a big part of that problem. So let's look at how you change the system. The first thing you have to do is you have to look at, what do I want to see different on the other side? What behaviors do I want to see out of my team? What behaviors do I want to see out of my employees? What behaviors do I want to see out of my peers that I'm not seeing now? What is it that I want to see? So for example, if you're saying I want them to take more risks, I want them to be more innovative, I want them to really participate more in our meetings, whatever the case may be, then the question you need to ask, the second question is this: what do I need to do differently to drive that behavior? What would encourage them to do that? So if I really want them to take more risks, then maybe one of the questions that I need to be asking is, how can I support that? So rather than give them the answer, go into a quick coaching mode that says, I can see this is frustrating for you that this employee's not giving you the information that you need. Let's talk through that. What's happening? How's it happening? How's that impacting you? What are the consequences if it stays the way that it is? Let's talk about possible solutions. What do you think now? And then obviously you have a right and an obligation and a responsibility as a manager to offer up a suggestion if they don't have one. Maybe some of your really novice employees or new employees don't have as much experience that they can build on will benefit more. But again, it's usually the leader speaks last, and it's usually towards the middle or end of a coaching conversation. So my challenge to you here is thinking about, if you have people on your team who are behaving in a way that you really don't want, and maybe they're dumping their problems on your lap, or they have this this habit of learned helplessness going on. My question to you would be, what can you do about how you're responding to that would help change that system? Recognize that you indeed could be part of the problem, and that's where coaching begins. So also you have to kind of think about your style. So first of all, we have to kind of get out of this framework of I'm ordering and you're doing, and be more I'm empowering you and then supporting you in your journey. We also kind of have to take a look at leadership styles. And as you look at these three styles on the screen, I want you to think to yourself, I wonder which one would be best to be a really great coach. I wonder which one of these would be the one that would really drive effective coaching. Well, let me first of all describe laissez-faire is, you know what, I'm too busy, go figure it out. So it's kind of like just throwing them out there, and you'll figure it out on your own. The autocratic is, I don't have time, and I'm just going to do it myself, and I'll tell you and I'll show you. And then the collaborative style is, you know what, let's work together and let me try to help frame the process and allow you to take more ownership of what we're going to do within that process, so that we can work together. So asking them their thoughts and ideas, spending time with them. Again, this is something that most employees really want. They want to know that their opinions are heard and valued, and that they're moving in a direction that's positive for themselves and the company. Another thing I typically think about here is when you take on this collaborative style, which, by the way, is the style that works best for a coach, is you also have to kind of think about what are some of the attributes or behaviors of good coaches. And I teach a lot of emotional intelligence, both in my team class and elsewhere. And we do know there are some key emotional intelligence skills that are critical for this. Empathy, the ability to see something from someone else's point of view, but not so much so that you can't maybe have that tough feedback. Assertiveness, so be able to be straightforward and candid in your questions. Certainly the ability to be a problem solver, to be flexible. So if the employee feels like maybe there's a different path that we need to take, you can work with them on that and be able to do that. Being attentive. This means that you don't do a lot of coaching with your smartphones and your laptops up in the air and then just looking at them briefly. It's really good eye contact. It's that open body stance. It's showing the other person that who you are matters to me, and it matters to me that I'm able to help you move forward in whatever situation it is. Also, the ability to follow through. Really good coaches hold the coachee accountable, and so you really have to have some good organizational and follow-up skills as well. So let me introduce you to the model. And of course, everybody loves acronyms, and if we can remember an acronym, obviously we can remember how to be a good coach. So the acronym is called FUEL. And if you think about, again, what we talked about with Jim Clifton at the beginning, we're trying to fuel performance development, not just manage it. We really want to try to inspire people to be the best that they can be. So F stands for frame the conversation, and we'll get into each one of these in detail on the slides as they come. Understanding the current state, exploring the desired state, and then laying out a success plan with the person that you're coaching. And this could be a child, or this could be a peer, this could be a direct report, this could be a team member, right? This could be a best friend in your world. So you can use this coaching model everywhere. One of the things the authors really speak to, and I believe this strongly, this is a framework, not a cage. And what we mean by that is there's a tendency for people to want to say, well, I can't do the E step yet because I haven't done the F step. It's more of a conversation, and sometimes the steps happen out of order, and as long as you're keeping it framed and guiding the conversation, the most important thing is for you and the person you're coaching to be on the same page. What are we trying to accomplish here? What does success look like? How can I be helpful to you? And then let's really get real and transparent about what the issues are, what possible solutions are. And then, you know what, let's not leave this conversation until we have a really, really solid action plan that we can that you can commit to and that I can follow up with you. So again, frame the conversation, understand the current state, explore the desired state, and then lay out the success plan. So in your handouts, what I did is I gave you some coaching questions. And these are what I would call generic pocket questions that would be really good for you to maybe have a couple of them and just practice them and get good with them, so that they're kind of like your go-to questions when you're coaching someone, so that you get more comfortable. So when the moment or the opportunity happens, you're prepared, and it doesn't feel like you're like following this strict little model. So let's take a look at this. The first step is framing the conversation. And there's probably three things that you really want to do in this. First of all, you want to identify whatever the behavior issue is that you want to discuss. Now, coaching can happen either you initiate the conversation as a coach, which means, can we have a couple of minutes, because I want to talk with you about the presentation that you made in front of the board yesterday, and maybe we can kind of work through. I want to kind of get your ideas, and I want to share with you some of my ideas on how that went. So that's a coach initiating. Now, other times the coachee is going to initiate the conversation with you. So they're going to be the ones coming in and saying, man, I am going to pull my hair out if I have to work with Connie 1 minute more. So they're initiating the conversation, and then it's up to you to get into that mode. So it works either way. You can initiate it, or the coachee. So the first thing you want to do is really kind of lay out, okay, what is the behavior that we want to discuss here? So probably one of the best questions is, what would you like to focus on? What is the issue or the situation at hand? And then you want to determine the purpose of the conversation. And maybe a really simple question for that is, okay, so what's a good outcome from our conversation? So obviously, you're frustrated with Connie, you're really struggling with working with her, and something's going on there. So what would be a good outcome? Maybe a good outcome for us would be to just identify what's really happening in the relationship right now, and maybe how you're contributing to that, or maybe some of the other things that are going on. But you need to get on the same page about what does success look like at the end of that conversation. And then the last one is agree on the process. So after you kind of said, okay, so we want to kind of come up with some maybe ways for you to improve your relationship with Connie. So let's do this. Let's do, first of all, a little reality check on what's really happening, maybe your part in the process, and then let's look at maybe what might be some of the causes, and maybe come up with 2 or 3 potential solutions, next steps that you could take. Would that be a good use of our time? So what you do in that agreeing on the process is you just kind of lay out a format for how the conversation is going to flow. We're going to do this, then we'll touch on this, and then we'll wrap up with this. Does that feel right to you? Does that feel like something that's going to be helpful to you? And I know in the times that I've coached, because I do some emotional intelligence coaching, in that step, I find, okay, I might have misunderstood that. So let's go back, because you really want to make sure that you're on the same page. So that's what we call framing the conversation. And that happens relatively quickly. It doesn't like 5 minutes or 10 minutes in the conversation. This next step is really critical. This is called understanding the current state. And I will just tell you from experience, and I'm holding up my hand here, this is where you're going to want to get in and give advice. This is where you are absolutely going to want to say, okay, well, hey, I had that happen to me, and you ought to try this, and you ought to do this. And boy, here's my experience with that. And you're going to really have to try to sit on your hands, or, bite your tongue, or whatever it is that you have to do to really maintain that sense of curiosity and just explore their point of view, because this is the test for success in this stage. Did you help them to see the situation in a different light? Did you help them to come to more clarity on what's really happening in the situation? That's your goal. When you're going through understanding the current state, you really want them to dig into what's happening so that they're feeling more confident about what the issue is. So understanding the coachee's point of view. So, at this time, you're just kind of, so tell me a little bit about it. So tell me what's happening with Connie. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how frustrating is that for you? And is that something that happens in every interaction with Connie, or is that just maybe sometimes? You really just probing and digging so that you can find out what's really happening. And then what you want to do is determine the consequences. And the purpose of this is to kind of light the fire. So they're saying, okay, I need to do something about this. You know, I've been complaining about this for years, or I've been doing the, you know, this has really been frustrating for me. No matter how uncomfortable for this is, I need to do something. I need to take action. And what you're doing when you're asking questions about determining the consequences is just saying, okay. So, you know, what happens if 6 months from now your relationship with Connie is still what it is? And is that a place where you want to be? And what's happening between you and Connie, is that impacting other people? And what would be the consequences of that? So really just creating, I guess, the why they need to move into the next step, really helping them to understand that this is not a good place to be. Now, I've been focusing on examples that are probably more focused on behavioral issues or people that are frustrated with current status, but you can also coach positive things. You know, you can coach someone who is looking for another opportunity within the organization, and they really want to grow and they want to try something new and different. And so when you're in this state, in this particular part of the model, what you're going to be doing is asking questions like, okay, so tell me where you're at right now. What are your strengths? What are your challenges? Tell me about your interest in moving into this kind of a role. All right, so what are the consequences in terms of keeping on this current path, or is that okay, or is there a time frame? And then the last thing you'll notice on this is offering your perspective. And again, I typically, before I offer up my perspective, is I ask permission. So I might be listening to this person talking about her relationship with Connie and how frustrating it is, and getting like, so we kind of understand what that is. And then I might just say something like, you know, would it be okay if I offered you a couple of other things to think about? Or, you know, it seems to me like this could be happening. Would it be okay if I shared that with you? So always, in my mind, it's better to ask permission. And one of my favorite questions when I'm trying to look at the consequences too is the old Dr. Phil question. So how's that working for you? Obviously, if it's not working, it's not working, and you want to try something new. The next step in the model is exploring the desired state. And this is where, okay, now we kind of understand what the real issue is with Connie and what's going on with her, and what's really happening and when it's happening. So now let's talk about, what does success look like? So the first thing you do is you're just asking questions about what success, what would you like to see happen? Well, obviously, I'd love to have a better relationship with Connie because that's really impacting me and it's impacting the team. Okay, so let's set a goal. What is it that you'd like to see? Well, I'd like to be able to communicate with her without having, you know, an argument or having what I would call this really nasty interpersonal conflict. I'd really love for us to discuss our ideas in a really healthy way. Okay, so let's talk about some ways we could get there. You know, let's talk about the different ways that would it be helpful to talk about your styles. Let's talk about that. Is there an opportunity for us to see if there's a way that you could use your styles differently? So you help explore different paths. Is it skill training? Is it sitting down and having a conversation with Connie? Is it having a mediation session? You know, you just brainstorm as many alternatives as you can. And again, the purpose of the coach is to ask the question so the employee keeps coming up with solutions after solutions. So really good probing questions. Okay, so what positive steps might work? What else can you think of? What else might work? And again, it's okay for you to come back and say, you know, may I offer an idea? Or could I offer up a suggestion as well? The last part of this particular step in the framework is to just basically say what could get in your way. What would prevent you from taking action on some of these solutions that we've just talked about? You know, fear, is it time? You know, what could get in the way of you actually moving forward with this? And then what are you going to do to address those or overcome those obstacles? And then the last step is to lay out the success plan. And so this is basically where you say, of all the things we've talked about, of all the possible solutions that we've got in front of us, what's what's the best one that you want to start with now? I mean, obviously we can do a lot of them, but let's get laid out. We'll do this one, and then maybe we'll do this one, and then really try to drill it down to specifics. Who's going to do what by when, and make sure that there's a timeline associated with that, so that it's laid out, because that's what you're going to need as a coach to follow up. You know, if she says, well, I guess I probably need to go talk to Connie. Okay, good. See you later. That's just not going to work. You've got to drive it into something that's a little bit more tangible. And then the second step in this is to enlist support from others. So basically saying, who can help you with this? How can I help you with this? Who's gonna have your back as you're working through this process? And then lastly, setting up the milestones. So when should we touch base on this again? It's kind of like when I do the maximizing team performance class, and we talk about tell me first. That if I have an issue with you as a team member, you're going to be the first person I talk to. I'm not going to tattle to the boss or gossip with my coworkers about it. So if you go to your boss and complain about somebody, they'll say, you know, you really need to go talk to this person and have a conversation. If I was the boss, 2 days later, I would follow up and say, did you have that conversation? Because there's a lot of times people won't do that. So there has to be an accountability piece with that. Framing the conversation to make sure you're both on the same page, really asking probing questions to understand the current state, and creating a little fire underneath the person or in the person so that they're willing to take a step forward to say, okay, I can't live in the status quo anymore. I can't let this go on. And then really working with them to try to help them come up with as many solutions and ideas as they can. And again, one of the measures of success in that exploring the desired state is how many of those solutions or ideas or potential actions are theirs versus yours. It's okay for you to have a couple of them, but boy, the majority of them really need to be coming from the coachee. And then lastly, laying out that whole success plan. So I tell you what I'd like to do, and this is going to be kind of fun, I think, I hope. So I'm going to give you a scenario, and then what I want you to do is use your questions, like when you ask questions, to throw out what would be some of the questions you would ask in this situation. So let me pull the scenario up. So here's the scenario, and this is a peer. This is not a direct report. This is not your boss, right? This is like a fellow team member or somebody you care about in the organization. They're really struggling with work-life balance. And the stress is negatively impacting her or his performance, and they're seriously thinking about quitting and finding a different job, which is, boy, that's just not a good thing. Not good for them, not good for the company. You certainly don't want to lose them off the team. So what I'd like you to do is just throw out some questions, and what if you could do this for me, type the first letter of the model. So if you're going to ask a framing question, just to F and then the question that you would ask, or E and the question you would ask, just so you get a feel for this. And again, feel free to use that other handout of potential questions if you see one in there that you like. All right, okay, let's see what some of these questions come in as. Thank you.
Okay, Gail, so our first question is F. What does work-life balance look to you?
Okay, can I respond to that as we're going through? I love that question. I love that question. And you know, what I would do is I would put that more in the exploring the desired state. I love that question. Because what you're basically doing is saying, okay, so we want to talk about work-life balance, and obviously you're feeling overwhelmed with your responsibilities, you know, at work and at home and the other things you've got going on in your life. But when you get to what does success look like? What do we want to have happen? What does work-life balance mean to you? What does that look like to you? And obviously you could use it in the framing mode too, so you both get on the same page. You want to make sure you're talking about the same thing. Great question.
Okay, the next question is C. Help me understand the seriousness of this for you.
Okay, so this is where you're trying to understand the current state and you're looking at the consequences. So help me to understand the seriousness of this for you. So I'm about to quit. That's how serious it is. Okay, great.
Okay, the next question is U. What have you already tried to create more of a balance?
Okay. So tell me about some of the things you've done. What have you already done to try to create more balance? That's great, because that helps you to understand what's currently happening. Well done. Cool.
The next question is F. Has something changed recently to drive you toward that feeling that way?
Good. Excellent.
Okay, next question is U. What are some of the options or alternatives you've looked at to relieve the stress in your life?
Nice. Good. I love the fact that all of these questions that are coming in are open-ended. You're doing a great job with that. You'd be surprised the number of times it's do, is, can, should, will, is, which are closed-ended, which don't get you a lot of conversation going. So well done on the probing open questions.
The next question is L. How can I support you?
Great. Yeah, so once you come up with this action plan, what can I do to be there for you? How can I have your back? Make this yourselves. You don't have to talk in a way that, I'm using language that I don't talk that way. As long as you're getting the outcome and you're getting the result that you need, that's great. Well done, nicely done. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, the next question is there anything you may be doing that may be contributing to this?
Okay. So I think that's a great understanding the current state question, because you're kind of helping them say, what am I doing to contribute to the problem here? Good.
Okay, the next question is U. How long have you been feeling this way?
Nice. So maybe this is something that just in the last month, we have a newborn and a new dog. Okay, so all of a sudden this is happening very quickly, not something that has been going on for a year or so. Great.
Okay, the next question is E. How would you make sure this does not happen in the future?
Great. Okay, so now you're getting them to start thinking about, as we come up with solutions, what can we do to make sure we don't find ourselves back here in another 5 or 6 months? Well done. Cool.
Okay, the next question is L. When should we touch base on this again to further assist you?
Good. Yeah. And if this is one of my friends, I would probably phrase it like, what, it's really important for me to see you making progress on this. When can you and I have coffee and chat again? Again, make it you, make it real.
Okay, the next question is U. Is there a recent change in your social life?
Okay. So now you're probing for, where is some of this stress coming from? Good.
Okay, the next question is L. What is a comfortable way for us to keep connected on this, to keep on track?
Nice. Great. Thank you. You guys are awesome. Rock stars. Is that all of them? Did we get quite a few of them?
Okay, the next question is L. What does your support system look like?
Great. So what do you have already going on in your life? And then I think maybe a quick follow-up to that question would be, how effective is that? So you've got this kind of a support system working right now. How effective is that? Is that working for you? And again, remember, if you tend to ask a closed-ended question, just quickly follow it up with an open-ended if you just get a short response. Let's take a couple more if they're there.
The next question is E. Have you identified particular areas of your work life that are of particular concern?
Good. Okay. Good.
Okay. Next question is L. How committed are you to making the change?
Okay, great, excellent. And you could ask that one probably at any of the understanding the current state, exploring the desired state, or laying it out at the end. Well done. It's easy to do this in a mode like this where you're sitting and you're thinking about it. Boy, when you're right in the middle of the conversation, it's, well, what's that? What was that question that I should ask? And that's why, again, I think if you can just get a couple of questions in each one of those steps in the model that you feel really comfortable with. I love on a scale of 1 to 10, how big of a deal is this to you? Because obviously you want to pick your battles. And I love that. How's that working for you? So, right, tell me what you've done so far. Okay, how's that working? Obviously, if it's not, what could we do differently? Try not to assume, especially when you're doing the understanding the current state. It's quick to make assumptions. Okay, well, you said this, so therefore this must be happening. Let's go down that path. Show the empathy, show the good listening. Okay, what I'm hearing you say is this, and based on that, this sounds like it could be one of the big contributors. How does that feel to you? Does that feel like that's really something that's driving your stress? And then once you get that confirmation, because remember, you want to leave that understanding the current state clear, that you're agreeing on what the issues are. All right, so with it, good job. Okay, here, Gale Mote, standing ovation, sitting ovation again. And now what I want to do is just offer up some of the trends and best practices that are happening with coaching, and then we'll open it up for some more questions about what coaching is, what it's not, the model, any questions that you guys want to fire off at me. So first of all, some coaching trends. We are seeing more and more need for coaching on what we would call the core skills, the interpersonal skills, EQ, your emotional quotient, emotional intelligence, and just how to be better leaders in general. So a lot of the coaching requests are coming that way. Now, is it an external coach or is it an internal coach? And it could be either. It could be either. I think it would be really great if internally more folks developed really good, solid coaching skills so that you have other options, right, to coach. It could be your manager, could be a great coach, and that's obviously what we're striving for, but sometimes getting somebody with a totally different perspective is helpful too. Coaching leaders of fast growth organizations. Wow, we're seeing a need in the world of entrepreneurs for more and more coaching. Because they're so focused on getting the business launched and the business is growing fast and the marketing and the financing and all the other kinds of things that go with it, that we're kind of losing the people focus. Now, the organizations that do better at this are the ones that are really culture focused, that are core values driven, right? We want to be one of those best places to work, and they ground themselves in hiring and training their leaders to do that. When you get a new role assignment or a challenging job expectation, which, by the way, the Center for Creative Leadership is one of the best ways to develop your leadership skills, is to do something like that. Obviously, having a coach and slash mentor could be helping that. And then we're seeing, obviously, a real increase, a tick in the need for stress management coaching, life balance coaching, lifestyle coaching, wellness coaching. All those things come into play there. So those are just some of the things about what's being coached. Here's what we're finding. It's not just for the C-suite. First line supervisors, managers, middle managers need to do a tremendous amount of coaching. Anyone who has direct reporting responsibility needs to learn how to be a great coach. But certainly team leaders, project managers, program managers, that are leading these huge projects, you need to know how to be a coach as well as just being directive and telling people what needs to happen. We do know that it is a key leadership competency. So as we're looking to promote people into leadership positions, as we're looking to hire people, we're looking for their ability to coach as being a key competency. It is something that you can train. It is a behavioral skill. Obviously, there's some core talents inside some of those steps that are a little harder to train, but certainly you can. I think a lot of them are tied to emotional intelligence, and we know those are behavioral skills. Coaching cultures are gaining traction. I mentioned Deloitte. I know some local organizations as well that are moving more away from, again, that formal performance management process into much more of a coaching conversation, day-to-day, weekly kind of thing. Let's make sure people are on the right track and that they're being the best that they can be. Interesting desire for coaching metrics. So how do you measure whether your coaching is working or not? And I'll go back to my tagline here. If it's observable, it's measurable. I don't have to survey it. You could, as a coach, you could survey your coachee and say, how helpful was this to you? And are there things that, we could be doing differently to be more effective? But I think it's just better to have a conversation. I think the measure of coaching effectiveness is when you lay out that success plan and you know what success means to that coachee. If they're moving in that direction in a way that feels good for them, then, your coaching is having an impact. Certainly at a higher level, you can measure things like engagement and retention and overall productivity, involvement, and those kinds of things. And you will see a correlation. You will see a correlation between those managers who are deemed to be great coaches and those business outcomes. So you can certainly measure those as well. Leveraging technology, coaching virtually. Many of you work on virtual teams where your peers or your direct reports are not with you, and so learning how to measure, leverage that technology. So you will need to be Skyping. You'll need to have a camera, and they'll need to have a camera. You can't coach without it. So get used to that, so that you're able to see the person and understand how they're feeling and responding to what it is that you say. It's really difficult, just chatting back and forth or audio conferencing to be able to get that sense of care and concern and being able to test to make sure that the understanding is there. And then, as I said, I think the internal coaching is going to expand. You don't have to hire an external coach, but you do need to have a good cadre of coaches available to you. And the last slide that I have here is just some clear best practices. So have a clear reason for using coaching, obviously. Select coaches the right way. Again, pay attention to those leadership styles we talked about. You want that collaborative style. You want to have some of those core behaviors, the attributes of really good coaches available to you, and then provide the training. Take them through the FUEL model and help them to understand, and do some practice sessions with them, and make sure that they feel comfortable developing those competencies. Make sure there's accountability. So that follow-up piece is critical. And then, as we talked before, measuring the outcomes of the training. So I'm going to quit rambling here for a little bit and open it up for any other questions that you might have.
Okay, and as a reminder, to submit a question, click in the questions box in the control panel, type in your question, and click send. I also have a quick announcement. Many of you have asked about the handouts that Gale has mentioned. We will be sending an email to all participants that includes a recording of today's webinar, Gale's slides, and the handout with the questions. So you will receive that after the webinar. Okay, Gale, we have our first question. Okay. How is coaching different from mentoring?
Okay. In my mind, and this is Gale Mote opinion, mentoring is where I ask for you to be my mentor. And certainly the mentor will do some coaching. But what I'm really looking for you from is to share your experiences and share your best practices and tell me what it was like and give me advice. And I want to hear from you. Hey, if I was in your shoes, I would do this, or here's what I learned from the School of Hard Knocks. And so you really want to make sure that you're giving the mentee what they want. The best thing you can do in mentoring and mentee is to sit down at the beginning and say, what does this relationship look like? What do I want from you? What do you need from me? And both sides should benefit from that. Coaching is, like I said, the art of the question. So when you're coaching, what you're really going to be doing is not necessarily sharing your experiences or your best practices or what you think the coachee should do. You're going to be guiding them, teaching them how to fish, and helping them come up with that on their own. Doesn't mean that there won't be a time when you're going to step in and say, hey, can I share something with you that I think is that I think might be helpful.
Our next question has come up a few times, but as a coachee, how do you tell your manager that you want more coaching?
It's a great that's a great question. This is kind of that art of influencing up. So maybe what you do is how you frame it, and you say to your manager, I appreciate some of the guidance and direction that you've provided to me. I think it would be helpful if we could make our conversations more interactive, and we could ask questions so that I could also contribute what I think are some of the solutions and issues as well. So if it feels like your manager is one way, just ask for that to be a little more collaborative process. And you could lay a copy of the book on their desk. I'm just kidding. No, don't. Okay, you could do that too.
What are some examples of coaching metrics?
Coaching metrics. Again, the very specific ones would be tied to the layouts, the success plan that you and the coachee. So whatever that is. But at a very high level, we go to the business outcomes. And so we look at things like, are we seeing more retention? You know, millennials, one of the characteristics is the need for more coaching, more feedback, more ongoing conversations. So you certainly could look at things like engagement, productivity. Do they feel like they're being more involved in decision making? All of those kinds of things can tie into coaching. But from the coach themselves, you know, am I doing a good job as a coach? Well, you could send out a survey and say, hey, you know, I've been coaching you for the last 6 months or whatever. I just have a few questions I'd like to ask you. And actually, in Zenger and Stennett's book, they have an evaluation form that coaches can use. But what I think is best is that maybe at the end of one of your coaching conversations, you just pause and you say, you know what, I would really love to get some feedback from you. So how is this working? You know, tell me, you know, can you share with me some of the things you appreciate? Can you also share with me maybe some of the things that would make this whole process more meaningful or more effective for you? I always believe this: engagement happens at a local level, not a global level, and it's in those moments where it happens. And so don't wait for an annual survey or something like that. Just ask for the feedback and make the adjustments. I know I do this when I'm coaching emotional intelligence. You know, is this helpful to you? You know, we've been working, you know, for about a year on this. You know, check in quarterly, see where it's going.
Okay, so if your direct report doesn't realize that there's a problem, should you intervene and coach the person, and how serious will they be about working on the issue?
Okay, that's a great question. Yes, my answer is yes. If you have a direct report who has a performance issue, now what you're going to do is you're going to give the feedback. You know, so you know, hey, I need to share with you the presentation in front of the board yesterday. Here's some things that went on, and we need to kind of talk about that. But when you start talking about that, that's when you switch from feedback mode into coaching mode. So tell me about how you felt that went, and you go back and forth, and they might not always agree with you, and that's where you can kind of come back in and say, hey, understand, here's what needs to happen going forward. But I think you will find that if you go into more coaching mode rather than, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, and this never needs to happen again, I think what you're going to find is more ownership and commitment.
Okay, Gail, we have time for one last
Okay.
question. How can you practice coaching when you aren't in a role with direct reports or involved in projects?
I think you are not on an island, so you have friends, you have associates, you have people outside of work. I know that I have friends that when we get together for, you know, after work and we're all talking to each other, things will come up about this and that and this and that and whatever, and there's an opportunity for you to just practice. And again, you might not practice the whole model. Maybe you just practice exploring, you know, the desired state, or maybe you practice trying to better understand what's really going on. But all of that is good practice. So I try to practice it with my cats, but they're not nearly as as cooperative as I'd like.
So we have one more
Polling question, if we can do that, please. Oh, I'm really pleased. Yes, that's great. Those are really good responses. So I just want to say thank you so much for participating, and I hope that you found value in thinking about coaching differently, and certainly we'll take the model and do some diligent practice with that. I'll just have one final slide for you to think about. In times of stress, the best thing we can do for each other is listen with our ears and hearts, and to be assured that our questions are just as important as our answers. Thanks again.
Thank you, Gale, for a wonderful presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar on this important topic. If you have any other questions or your question wasn't answered today, please feel free to contact Gale directly at the contact information listed on the screen. Once this webinar fully ends, you will see a link to a very brief survey. We appreciate getting your honest feedback on this session so we can enhance our future offerings. On behalf of the Tippie College of Business and the University of Iowa Community Credit Union, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.